everyone, this is lesson 7.2 on the converse of the Pythagorean theorem. So in this lesson, you're going to learn how to use the converse of the Pythagorean theorem to verify if the triangle is right, acute, or obtuse. And I know you will be watching this the day before Christmas break, so it might be helpful to kind of review this lesson before you start the assignment when you come back on Monday. So, on Monday in 2 weeks when you take the Edulastic assignment, look through your notes real quick just to refresh yourself since it would be 2 weeks. So I'll kind of count on your guys' responsibility to do that on your own. So for the Pythagorean Theorem Converse, it basically says, okay, so you can write all this down, but it basically says that if a squared plus b squared equals c squared, then it's a right triangle, where c is going to be your longest side. So basically, the too long didn't read version means if the Pythagorean theorem works, if a squared plus b squared does equal c squared, then it's a right triangle. If it doesn't work, if the right side is different from the left side, then it's not a right triangle. So for this one, we're going to say, okay, 51 is the longest side. So if it is a right triangle, 51 would be your hypotenuse. So we'll check to see if 24 squared plus 46 squared equals 51 squared. So I hope you have your calculator because I sure wouldn't want to multiply these by hand. So I'm going to get my calculator out and do 24 squared plus 46 squared. Oops, wrong button. Where's the square button? Plus 46 squared. That equals 2692. And then I'm going to calculate 51 squared. And that is 2601. So 2692 does not equal 2601. So no, this is not a right triangle. Not a right triangle. It's my little symbol for right triangle. What is the longest? Oh, this just says what is the longest side and then tell whether it's right or not. So the longest side here would be 25. So that should be the hypotenuse. So let's check 15 squared plus 20 squared equals 25 squared. Now, some of you might be noticing something about these numbers. Something special about these numbers. So 15 squared plus 20 squared is 625, and 25 squared is 625 also. So you might have noticed that 15, 20, and 25 are multiples of the 3, 4, 5 Pythagorean triple. Because if you multiplied each of these numbers by 5, you would get this. So 15, 20, and 25 are actually one of your Pythagorean triples, since it's a multiple of the original Pythagorean triple. So that's another thing you could use to determine this. You could say yes, because these are Pythagorean triples. All right. And then how about for number 3, a triangle with side lengths of 4 square root 3, 12, and 6. Well, okay, so 12 sounds like it should be the longest side, but what about 4 square root 3? Well, one thing you can do is type in 4 square root 3 to double check that it's not greater than 12. So 4 square root 3 is only 6.9. So the other way you can determine that is, well, if 4 times 3 is equal to 12, the square root of 3 is smaller than 3. So 4 square root 3 would have to be smaller than 12. So let's double check. Now that we know that 12 would be the hypotenuse, let's see if it's a right triangle. So remember that when you square 4 square root 3, you have to do it like this. And then plus 6 squared, does that equal 12 squared? So let's check. So 4 square root 3 would be, remember the 4 squared would be 16, and then times the square root cancels out. So 16 times 3 is 64, I think. Let me double check that. 48, sorry. So 48 plus 36. And then that should be equal to, I know the 12 squared is 144. So I'm not thinking that 48 and 36 are going to add up to 144. So this would be no, not a right triangle. Number 4, So we'll do the same thing here. So we'll type in 2 square root 41. And then I'll talk about how you can estimate that. The square root of 41 is 12.8. So 4 square root 41 is the longest side. It is a hypotenuse. The way to estimate that is look at 41 and find the closest perfect square, which would be 36. So let's pretend that this is the square root of 36 for a moment. Well, the square root of 36 is 6. So this would be 2 times 6, which would be 12. So 2 square root of 41 has to be at least bigger than 12, which would still make it the longest side. So that's one way that you can estimate it. All right, so let's do 8 squared plus 10 squared equals 2 square root 41 squared. So 64 plus 100 is 164. And this would be 2 squared is 4 times 41 gives us also 164. So yes, this makes a right triangle. All right, so if number 1 and 2 don't make a right triangle, what kind of triangle do they make? So the next two theorems talk about how to tell if it's going to be an acute triangle or a right triangle if the Pythagorean theorem doesn't work. So if the square of the lengths of the longest side, which is basically your hypotenuse, okay, so if your hypotenuse squared, not just your hypotenuse, but your hypotenuse squared is less than the other two sides squared, then it's acute. So basically, if you've got a squared plus b squared and c squared, if the hypotenuse squared is less than, if it's smaller than these two added up, then it's going to be acute. But on the other hand, if it's greater than, if the hypotenuse squared is bigger than, remember we're going the opposite way, this means bigger than a squared plus b squared, then it's obtuse. So how do you figure that? Well, for this, think about your hypotenuse think about a right triangle here for a moment. Just pretend this is a right triangle. Okay, so right now, as a right triangle, the hypotenuse squared is equal to these two sides squared. But the smaller we make this angle, then the smaller the hypotenuse is going to become, therefore making it an acute triangle. So therefore c squared is less than. So c squared would become smaller. However, if you've got your same right triangle, okay, maybe that's not exactly the same as this one, but if you've got another right triangle, and if you want to make this right angle bigger than 90 degrees, which would make it obtuse, then the hypotenuse is going to get bigger. So the bigger the hypotenuse, the greater the opposite angle will be, making it obtuse. Make sense? So looking back at number 1, 2601 is smaller, the hypotenuse squared is smaller, so this would be an acute triangle. And then for number 3, the hypotenuse is bigger, making it obtuse. Or the hypotenuse squared is bigger. All right, so a couple of practice questions related to these. Decide whether the numbers can represent the side lengths of a triangle. If they can, classify the triangle as right, acute, or obtuse. So remember that in order for a triangle to exist, any two sides of the triangle must be greater than the third. So we have to ask ourselves, is 21 plus 43, it says any two sides has to be greater than the third. So is 22 plus 43 greater than 49? Are these two greater than 43, and are these two greater than 22? Yes, it does make a triangle. So let's check to see if it makes a right triangle. So we'll do 22 squared plus 43 squared. How does that relate to 49 squared? So I'm just going to do this all in my calculator here. 22 squared plus 43 squared is that. 49 squared is that. So 2333, 2401. 2333, 2401. Since your hypotenuse squared is bigger, that would make it an obtuse triangle. All right, so here, check to see if it can make a triangle, and I think yes. So we'll do, this would be your hypotenuse, 18 squared plus 23 squared. How does that relate to, I'm going to leave this blank, 25.2 squared. Get my calculator. 18 squared plus 23 squared is 853. 25, squared is 635. So 853, 635 and some change, and that would mean it's less, so that would make it an acute triangle. All right, number 7. So 3 square root 3 just going to check what that is. Sorry, square root 13 is 10.81. So that would be the hypotenuse. So we'll do 6 squared plus 9 squared. How does that relate to 3 square root 13 squared? So 6 squared plus 9 squared would be 36 plus 81, which is 117. And then this would be 9, because 3 squared is 9 times 13. I think 9 times 13 is 117. Yes, it is. So since they're equal, that would make it a right triangle. And then here, 2, 3, 7. So hold on a second. 2 plus 3 is not bigger than 7. So this would actually not make a right triangle, or not make a triangle at all. So not a triangle. Okay. And then we're going to do one last question, and this last question involves using coordinates and using the distance formula to find lengths of sides. So when you are trying to prove what kind of triangle it is, when you have coordinates, you can't just say about the angles. Okay, you have to, you could say about the angles if you're doing slope, but this is to use algebra to classify the triangles by its sides. And specifically, I would like to practice using the distance formula. So let's plot our triangle. So A is 0, 2. B is 3, 3. And C is 5, 1. I'm going to connect my triangle. Okay, so one way you can figure out if this angle here, B, is a right angle is to use slope. The other way, like what if I told you to use the Pythagorean theorem to prove? So in that case, we would want to find the side lengths. So we're going to find the side lengths of AB, BC, and AC using the distance formula. All right, so AB would be 3 minus 0 squared plus 3 minus 2 squared. This would be 9, and this would be 1. 1 squared is 1, so this would be the square root of 10. And I'm just going to leave it like that, because when I do distance formula, I'm just going to square it anyways. So BC is next. So this would be the square root of 5 minus 3 is 2 squared, plus 1 minus 3 is negative 2 squared. And this would make 4 and 4, because negative cancels, so square root of 8. And I'm just going to leave it like this again. We don't need to simplify that. And then finally, let's get AC. So this would be 5 minus 0 is 5 squared. 1 minus 2 is negative 1 squared. So this would be 25 plus 1 is 26. All right, so now over here, I'm going to check with the Pythagorean theorem. So this is my longest side, so that would be our hypotenuse if it was. So we would do the square root of 10 squared plus the square root of 8 squared equals the square root of 26 squared. Okay, so then the square roots are just going to cancel out, and we just get 10 plus 8, which is 18, and 26. So since the hypotenuse squared is the longer side, then that would make this an obtuse triangle. Okay, but you're going to want to know how to do it like this using the Pythagorean theorem, because, for example, if this were like a math essay question and it told you to show your work, you would want to know how to go through this process. All right, so that is it for this lesson. I hope you guys have a great day.